See you next time. Thank you for being here. All right, the time is 10:18, and the board is now reconvened in open session. The first thing we'll do is take action on our closed session items. So let's start with Kristen.
Yes, Madam President. I move to propose termination of Anthony Bassey's probationary employment contract for good cause, and to authorize the superintendent or his designee to notify Mr. Bassey of this action in accordance with applicable law and policy.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Tossan and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Please vote. Motion passes. Ms. Hellinger?
Yes, thank you. I move to propose suspension without pay pending discharge of Anthony Bassey for good cause, and to authorize the superintendent or his designee to notify Mr. Bassey of his action in accordance with applicable laws and policies.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Hellinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, Madam President. I move to find that teachers Stacy Landry, Denise Brumal, Mary Nelson, and Lanisha Redmond failed without good cause to comply with the resignation requirements of the Texas Education Code and abandon their employment contracts.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rosenthal and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Mr. Rice?
Madam President, I move that the Board of Trustees assign the Level 3 Employee Grievance Appeal of Dana Rowe to Richard Hightower, who will serve as the board's designated hearing officer under Board Policy DGBA Local.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Mr. George?
Yes, Madam President. I move to appoint Fidel Mahfouz to the position of elementary school principal and to approve him as a professional development and appraisal system PDAS appraiser for 2015-16.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. George and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. That concludes our action on closed session items. So now we will go toward the board members. Next item is the board member reports. Mrs. Tossan.
Yes, Madam President. We've been busy at many activities this month, including Quail Valley Elementary 40th Anniversary Celebration, the Fort Bend Student Council Conference, the Fort Bend Education Foundation meeting, volleyball playoff games and football playoff games. We're very excited about those. Marshall High School Academic Excellence Awards, Travis High School Academic Excellence Awards, Student Leadership 101 Kickoff, Gulf Coast Area Association of School Boards meeting, Sugar Mill Veterans Day program, Touchdown Club Luncheon honoring 3 Fort Bend ISD students, Trustee Roundtable with Senator Kolkhorst, the Ridgepoint High School Swim Meet, the Baines Middle School Band Concert, Madden Elementary School Tour, Heritage Rose Elementary Awards Ceremony, the School Finance Luncheon, Audit Committee meetings, the Middle School Basketball Scrimmage, and a Ferndale Henry visit. That concludes the report.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Do we have any special reports by any of the board members this evening?
Yes.
Mrs. Tossan.
So today, I, along with President President James and Mr. Burdine. We had the honor of attending the roundtable of trustees that was put on by Senator Lois Kolkhorst. There were about 30 to 35 trustees in attendance, representing about 15 school districts throughout District 18, which Senator Kolkhorst represents. We were the largest school district, and representatives were there for school districts as small as less than 1,000 kids. So it was a pretty broad array of trustees representing District 18. It was a very interesting conversation. Senator Kolkhorst inquired of us what the number one issue is that we perceive that we're facing in public education. And the top three, number one was local control and governance issues. Number two was state assessments and the state accountability system. Number three were the TEKS and curriculum, the number of TEKS. And then number four were discipline issues. And that's how the trustees voted when she asked for our opinions. We discussed several issues, including hiring and retention of high-quality teachers. We discussed the number of TEKS that school districts are required to teach their students and the overload that this causes for teachers as well as students. And we discussed the one-size-fits-all approach to teaching and the accountability system. And every trustee there, I believe, expressed the need to allow for flexibility and for the state to allow more flexibility. And we also discussed taking a pre-K through 16 approach and preparing our students for college and career. Senator Kolkhorst did give us some to-dos when we got back to our district, and so I wanted to share those with administration and with the board. First of all, she asked us what our track record was and for some information on our teachers who are certified through the alternative certification program. So she asked specifically for some information on that, how that's working for us, and just generally what our track record is on that. So I think that's something that we would ask from administration. And for the trustees, she has asked us to come back and think about what we can change. What small things would we recommend that they could change at the state level that would make a big difference? And the way Senator Kolkhorst put it is, what small clicks can we implement at the state level that we think over time would make big change in districts? And so we would ask all of you to think about that, and perhaps we can put together a list and submit it for her. And she has stated her desire to do this again, to have another roundtable in January. So we can all look forward to that.
And I think she particularly described that question as homework.
Yes.
And I would not want to show up without my homework at Senator Kolkhorst's next roundtable. But those suggestions that you mentioned, the clicks, were really around the concept of local control and governance issues. So that's trustees, things to think about. So when I am asking you about this in a few weeks, you'll have some ideas.
And interestingly, I would add that we had a broad representation there today, but we all agreed on a lot of the issues that we face. It may look a little bit differently than in the smaller districts than it does in a large district like Fort Bend ISD, or in a rural district as opposed to our sort of suburban to urban district. But we all had a lot of agreement around the issues that we face and the concerns we have. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Burdine?
No, I was just going to say the same thing that Mrs. Tossan said. It was interesting to me that although we're so vastly different, yet we're so much alike in so many things in education. So that was encouraging for me, because I often feel like, well, it doesn't really pertain to us or doesn't pertain to them because of the size of their district. But I was proven wrong this morning after hearing from some other board members from other size schools.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other special reports? All right, then we're ready to go on to the consent agenda. Do we have any items that we'd like to remove from the consent agenda?
11B.
11B, the portion of 11B that is referring to the Colony Meadows Elementary donation, is that accurate, Mr. Rice?
Yes, ma'am.
I think there are other things on that particular one. All right, so just the Colony Meadows portion of that item. And then anything else? Then I'd entertain a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda.
Madam President, I move to approve consent agenda items 11A through F as presented, with the exception of the one item of 11B.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. And just for clarification, it's the portion of 11B that references Colony Meadows Elementary, not the full item of 11B, because there's other donation items on that list. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Now we're ready to consider the approval of a donation for the Colony Meadows by the Colony Meadows Elementary PTO. Do we have a motion?
Yes, Madam President. I move that the board approve receipt of the donation from the Colony Meadows Elementary School PTO for a multi-purpose pavilion structure at Colony Meadows Elementary School, and that the board direct the superintendent to negotiate and execute a related right of entry construction agreement with the Colony Meadows Elementary School PTO.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Burdine and a second by Mr. George. Do we have discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenthal.
So on the surface, I'm not sure, I think I brought this up a couple of months ago or whenever we referred it back. These things are usually pretty simple, but for whatever reason, for many reasons, this one's not. And it kind of puts us in a tough spot, but when we look at our roles as trustees, governing the district, holding it accountable, that's our job, and our job is not necessarily to be judges as to whether a project is worthy and should go forward. I mean, we have a procedure. It's really up to the PTO. It's up to that school. It's up to the district. So I understand the concerns of the neighborhood. I really do. I put myself in their position, and I understand it. But it's we sent it back. They rediscussed it. From what we've heard, they took votes again, and I don't see how we can intervene and say no, you can't do this. I don't see that as really something that we have to do, that we should do, I should say.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have additional discussion? Mr. Rice?
Yes, Madam President. I'll direct my question to Dr. Dupree. Dr. Dupree, in the case of a situation like this, or not just Colony Meadows, but any school that we accept a donation for some type of construction, how do we ensure that when the contractor is on site, that they're going to perform the construction in a safe manner? And how do we ensure that we're protected if the contractor were to go bankrupt, or if the contractor abandoned the project, or how do we ensure that background checks are made and all of those types of things? And how do we do that?
It's my understanding that those things are handled through our construction division, and that whenever we receive this type of donation, before we even get to the point of bringing it to the board, we work closely with the PTO, with their designated construction firm, to work out all of these details.
Yes, but who holds the contract? Because the PTO's not used to dealing with construction contracts. How do we make sure that we work all this out, but how do we know that people are going to follow through with that?
Well, the PTO holds the contracts. And so, again, it's my understanding, and I don't know, Oscar, if you can weigh in on that, but it's my understanding that then we designate project managers to work with the PTO and the contractor.
Yes, sir. We would have a project manager, but the district does not hold the contract. The contract is held by the PTO.
Well, who makes sure that the background checks have been performed on all the subcontractors coming on site? And who makes sure we have payment and performance bonds and that the contractor has insurance?
I do not have the answer for that. I would have to check into it.
Well, I mean, if they're moving heavy machinery on site and all that kind of stuff, it just, somebody's got to make sure all that stuff is covered.
Yes, sir.
I'm a little concerned about taking action on this if we don't know. If we don't know if all the proper things are being checked out, for lack of a better way to say it.
Can you weigh in on that, Mr. Morris?
Yes, Mr. Rice. The motion includes the directive for the superintendent to enter into an access and construction agreement. And it is the goal of the access and construction agreement to bind the PTO so that when the PTO hires the contractor to perform the work, the safeguards that you mentioned would be part and parcel of that agreement. So it would require that payment and performance bonds be in place. It would require criminal background check certifications so that employees that are working for the contractor that are on district property have undergone proper criminal background checks. It would require that the construction is built according to specifications for reasons of safety for students and employees, and it would similarly require the availability of GL insurance.
Mr. Prez, who on your staff will make sure that all that stuff is reviewed?
The project manager would make sure.
Do you have someone designated for that?
We do.
Okay, who is it?
James Kraler.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Tulsa.
So when the motion directs the superintendent to negotiate and execute the right of entry in the construction agreement, does that mean that the district enters into that agreement and not the PTO?
So that agreement will be between the district and the PTO, so that it'll require the PTO in turn to ensure that the contractor that the PTO retains to perform the construction work abides by those obligations that the PTO has promised to the district.
And it's the project manager that's going to make sure that the PTO does that. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that would be correct.
Ms. Hellinger.
I'm just a little bothered by the fact that it took us a minute to figure out who does that. I'm not sure. I'm confident that we have the right person assigned. I mean, that the project manager is actually going to do that. I don't know if there's checks and balances for that. I just don't feel confident based on the conversation that we just had today, whether or not the project manager is actually going to do that. Because to me, that should have been a really just off the cuff, right out your a quick answer of who's responsible for that. So I'm not sure. Are we just answering that just to say the project manager? I mean, I don't have confidence with that answer. I'm sorry, not at this time.
The project manager looks over all the paperwork. The only reason that I couldn't answer directly is I was not familiar with the right of entry. But based on what council is saying, the project manager would then look at that paperwork the same way that they look at all other paperwork on their project.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
And so are there specific forms that the PTO will have to give to those contractors and make sure that they get signed that agrees, that binds the contractor to all these terms?
I would have to report to council.
So, Mr. Rosenthal, I think what would happen in that circumstance is that the agreement, the access and construction agreement that would be negotiated between the PTO and the district, it would be the expectation of the district that the PTO would take that agreement and share it with their contractor when they retain the contractor, so that the PTO fulfills its obligations to the school district.
But the contractor will have to sign off on background checks and all the other things, correct?
That's correct, and so then it would be the expectation that they provide proof of those items that would be required in the access and construction agreement.
And
Payment and performance bonds, certification of criminal background checks, proof of insurance.
But it requires them to show that
Yeah,
proof.
and we've done this before in this district in another context.
Mrs. Rincon, do you have a comment or?
Yeah, I wanted to
something to
comment
add?
that in discussing this item with Max Cleaver before the board workshop, we did talk about, I'm sorry, after the board workshop, we did talk about previous practice. So we have done right of entry contracts with, usually when we have MUDs involved, but with PTOs, what we've used previously were letters that detailed the information and expectations of the district with the PTO. So very similar to the contract in having the terms about the expectations of the district, and all of that was vetted on this project. It's just in a different form. It was a letter. We had considered whether or not the contract, it actually needed to be a right of entry contract, but this would actually be the first time that we would be doing it with a PTO where a MUD is not involved. So that's the only difference. So I don't think that it was hesitation about who was going to do it, because I know from my discussions with Max Cleaver that the project manager would be the one to ensure that those terms that would have been in a letter, which was used previously with the PTO, would be followed through, just to allay any fears or concerns.
Mr. Perez, is your project manager going to conduct a pre-construction meeting and identify laydown areas, and sort of how will they segregate the work zone from the student zone?
Yes, sir, that would all be, that would all happen before they would come on site.
Well, how do they do that? Do they go on site and work it out there, and is the principal involved? And
Yes, sir, it is, but there's normally an initial meeting in our office, and then we go out on site and go ahead and lay everything out. If there's any fencing that needs to go up, it goes up before anybody comes on site.
okay, thank you.
A question related to that. So in that initial meeting, is the principal of the school involved?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
So they understand from the get-go the expectations of safety and the site and the contract and the expectations of the contractor?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Do we have any other discussion or questions on this item? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. That concludes our action items for this evening. Our next, sorry if that was me. Our next item is information. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, ma'am. We have determined it would be in the interest of time, since it's 10:42 p.m., we have postponed the career and technical education planning update until the board's scheduled workshop on November 30th, Monday night, November 30th.
All right, thank you very much. And then next on the list is future board meeting agenda items.
Yes, if you look at page 95 of your board book, you can see that we're scheduled for our next meeting on November 30th. On that evening, we're going to hear an update on the educational technology planning process, and our goal for that evening is to engage the board in a dialogue to bring you up to date of where we've been, where we're going, and to get your feedback on our educational technology plan. On that same evening, we'll discuss the CTE. As I just shared, we'll discuss the CTE planning and kind of clarify for you on that evening where we're headed. There, we are going to seek approval of the CTE plan in November. That is going to be a
I mean
plan.
December.
I'm sorry, yes, December.
Yes.
That's going to be a plan in concept, not a specific site-based or specific location even, but the idea. We want to get the board's approval of the conceptual idea of where we're going, and then we'll continue to work out details and implement that plan. But I'll provide you more update on the 30th. In regard, as you can see, we've updated future meetings all the way through June 2016. I'm not going to read all of this to you. The big rocks coming up, though, are in December. We're going to begin our policy review updates with a portion of Section E that's related to instruction and an overall discussion of the process we've used to get to this point. So it'll be an introduction to policy review and a few policies from policy of Section E, along with a little more, a calendar, hopefully to lay out the long-range picture for the full policy review. As you'll note on the screen, it addresses that in December we'll address the high school class rank issue. We are going to postpone that item until we get better clarification of a pending Supreme Court decision. As you know, as you may be aware, there's one of our own students from Fort Bend has filed an appeal all the way to the Supreme Court regarding the access and the holistic review process at the University of Texas, which could have implications for the 10% rule, laws, and policies related to class rank. So we're going to postpone that pending the outcome of that Supreme Court decision. We're also in December going to provide advanced academics planning update, and Mickey Morris is going to be with us in December to give the board an update on the competitive sealed proposal procurement method. As you know, we've got 4 schools we're considering building, and so we're going to very soon need to let the procurement on that, and we want to bring the board up to date and kind of get your thoughts around the selection criteria and just make sure everyone's highly aware of the process itself. So that'll be in December. Let's see, I don't see anything else major. I mean, there's other things there, nothing major. January we'll continue. We'll do an update on the community relations. We're also going to do our 2014 bond program update with the annual report by the Bond Oversight Committee. We're also going to add to one of the January opportunities an update on our work on the schools that are in improvement required. We've been talking about those these last few weeks, and we'll give you an update quarterly on our work, and so we'll do that again in January. In January, we'll also launch into the budget development process. As you can see, every month, starting in January, there's the budget development with staffing. There's budget development with compensation going in through the rest of the early spring. So there'll be a lot of discussion about budget, and a lot of our work will focus on that important task. We'll also seek approval of the district calendar for the 2016-17 school year in January, as well as continue with the policy reviews. Really, I think that's, unless you want me to go on, I think I can.
No, I think it'll change 3 times before we get to March.
Thank you.
That's because we're flexible leadership, Dr. Dupree. We're doing what we need to do when we need to do it. Do we have any further discussion or any further business? Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Dupree on this outline of our upcoming items? All right, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.